This is the WP Elevation Podcast, helping WordPress consultants elevate.
G'day, I'm Troy Dean from WP Elevation, and I'm very pleased to have with me here on the WP Elevation Podcast, Jake Goldman from 10up. Good afternoon, Jake.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. Is it afternoon or evening where you are?
Somewhere in between, late afternoon.
Cool. And you're in California, right?
I am. I'm in a suburb north of Sacramento, Northern California.
Cool. For those of you that don't know, Jake Goldman is president and founder of the largest WordPress agency on the planet. He employs about 8,500 people, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on.
Losing count.
But first of all, quick competition. I'm going to give away a $50 Amazon voucher a little bit later on in this interview, so you can go to Amazon and buy your favorite business book. I hope that's what you're spending these vouchers on. And stick around for details on how you can enter that competition a little bit later on. Okay, before we start talking about all things WordPress-ish, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So it depends, I guess, which stage of being a kid we mean. I know that if we're talking about like teenage years when I started to think about things beyond, astronaut, most of my, and realized that wasn't going to happen. Most of my ambitions actually, I think fittingly, were actually around journalism. I was really into the idea of being a writer, and I think in reframing journalism to being mass communication, right? I was always into the idea of being able to put something out there and having a mass audience, people that you've never met, experience what you've created and what you've produced. So I actually think there's actually a pretty clean line from there into what's really modern mass communication, right, with online. What is it with
WordPress dudes who live in the States? They all wanted to be astronauts when they were kids. Is that an American thing because you guys have NASA over there, or is it a WordPress thing? Is it a?
Yeah, it's a WordPress thing. It's because NASA.gov is. No, I don't think I actually ever wanted to be an astronaut. I meant that sort of coyly in the what you. Right. But it is like a sort of a cliche American idea of like a hero. I mean, when you think of like accomplishments, where you're sitting in a bar at a table talking to someone what they've accomplished in their life, it's hard to beat. I orbited the planet, or I walked on the moon.
Yeah.
Even if I had 8,500 employees, I don't think it computes. That guy still wins, at least by American standards.
In Australia, it's like I want to grow up and play football. And I think it's because we don't have a space program here in Australia.
There's definitely a class, in our country too, that want our version of football, want to be that's what they want to be when they grew up. I don't think that usually translates into developer later, but I admire the broader cross appeal in your country.
Yeah. And when did you discover the web? Do you remember when you discovered the internet and thought, this is something I want to play with?
So many ways I could take that.
After you were a teenager, I mean.
Yeah. So, I vaguely remembered that I first discovered the web through one of those 30-day disc in the mail AOL free trials, which it almost seems weird to call it discovering the web. It seems like it's saying discovering IM or something. It was more of a feature, that 30-day trial, than it was a thing unto itself. When I really sort of came back to coming back to the web and realizing it sometime in the middle of high school. I'd always been, in addition to wanting to be in journalism, I was always into tech, right? I was always the guy building his computers with his dad, right? And, messing around with computer games and software. And I had an opportunity to apply that to a fairly young web to develop on in the mid-90s. And I realized it was actually a lot of fun. It was a sort of mass communication, and at that time, we were told that we could make money doing it. And so that's where I gravitated, I guess.
Cool. Do you remember the first time you saw the WordPress dashboard?
The first time I saw it, I think, would have been in 2005, 2006. I was building a custom platform for the sort of e-learning business a friend of mine was putting together, and we adopted it as sort of the news component, right, of the site. Back when I really probably, didn't know all that much what I was doing. I don't even remember how we settled on WordPress, whether I just found it through a search, whether somebody had recommended using this as the news engine. But I remember being struck compared to the rest of the stuff I was doing about how sort of easy it was to get in there and put a simple news site together. But I'd never crossed my mind in a deeper way that this is going to somehow become the center of my universe at some point. That wasn't for probably a few years later.
Okay. We're going to talk about that a little more in a moment, and the evolution of 10up. But before we get there, let's just take a little bit of a snapshot and get to know Jake, the Jake Goldman of today. How do you describe what you do in one sentence? When you meet someone for the first time and they say, "Hey, what do you do, Jake?" What's your elevator pitch?
So my elevator pitch to people at like your audience that have some context is that I'm focused on growing a business centered on open source software and publishing, right? That I love online publishing, I love free open software, and I'm trying to build a company and a business that can really leverage and grow that ecosystem. To the barber cutting my hair, asking what I do. It's actually funny. My answer used to be pretty consistently up until about 8 or 9 months ago, just that I make websites. And if they dig a little bit deeper, I own a company that makes websites. It's shifted to me more and more saying, which I think is a reflection of how my responsibilities have changed, me more and more saying that I run a business that makes websites. It's shifted from a description of sort of a technical thing I pride myself in to a business role that I think is more honest.
Did you find yourself kind of avoiding saying I build websites, because then invariably everyone then says, "Oh, really? I need a website for my little business," and you just kind of have to then have that awkward conversation that no, I'm not. These are not the droids you're looking for. I'm not your man.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point, because I think there's a lot of people that do this, right? Like, there's a lot of people that are like the nephew that can build a website, right? I think at some point it's almost hard to say this. I don't even know if I've said this out loud or even thought this to myself before you just asked me. But at some point, I think for lack of a better word, the cachet, right, of saying I make websites has almost been diminished, right? It's almost, I think I'm not sure what to compare it to exactly, but at some point, I think the excitement of that has been diminished. I mean, I think if Joe Schmo walks into a conversation or sits down at the table, right, says I make websites, I don't think people quite get the picture of what exactly it is that we're doing, right? What the sort of the scale and the scope of what we're doing. They're probably thinking it's a guy that made a website for my coffee shop, which doesn't mean it's not cool. I mean, in terms of like the people saying like I need a website, I mean, I think that's fine. Like I didn't actually get that much of that. People just didn't want to work with me, I guess, that knew me. And some of it is I don't mind explaining that it's probably not, if it's not something that we do, that there might be a different kind of fit, and it's still part of it still gets a brand out there, gets a name in their head, for want of a few minutes of saying, no, we don't do that kind of website.
Sure. It's funny, the whole perception is really funny, because I was talking to a colleague recently who she works from home, and she builds websites for clients using WordPress, and her family are basically at family barbecues and dinners and stuff. Her family are always kind of saying, "Oh yeah, she's just kind of doing this until she finds a job."
That's sad, right? I don't know. Did we somehow work our way down, like some consequence of healthcare.gov? We're with lawyers or something now.
Yeah, it's funny
say
how
it quietly.
It's funny that sometimes it's perceived as not being kind of a real business function.
Well, it's when people, I like to joke with people when we talk about what it's like to be in the web business or like to be in this business. I like to joke that this and babysitting are the last truly open competitive industries that are out there. Because what do you need? What do you need to build a website business? You need to spend what? You can get with a $400 computer, a $300 computer. You need to buy some basic, software and computing power. And other than that, the only other requirement that you have is convincing somebody you can do it. Right? There's no license. I don't have a thing on my back wall saying I'm a certified web developer. Right? Nobody asks to see my, state registration. Right? There's very few barriers, right? And the startup costs to doing it, if you're smart enough, it's ridiculous, right? It's on the floor.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody has a computer. That's really all you need: a computer and a willingness to learn, impress yourself. And extrapolate even further from that, right? The idea that, let's broaden babysitter, right? And let's call it like home care, right? Like that can be a 16-year-old that knows how to change a diaper. Or knows how to make sure a 5-year-old doesn't run into the street, right? All the way up to somebody that's, runs a firm that's like professional nannies, right? And like takes care of people at home and runs homes, and right, which is obviously a very high end, right? And a very I think in some ways still a fairly prestigious isn't the right word, but more serious, right? With the same deal with web development, right? So you have people that sort of like know their way to sort of like implement WordPress, right, or something like Joomla or another CMS, right, that call themselves website makers. You even have tools like Squarespace now that if you want something simpler, or WordPress.com, right, that that you barely, you need to be technically curious, right, and a little bit sophisticated, and that's about it, right? All the way up to obviously companies like ours and companies like, companies that are much larger than ours, right? Companies like the Accentures of the world, right, that are doing massive things, and IBM doing massive things with, with web technology. I'm not sure where I was going with this particular point of view or particular rant, but I think it's we almost need new terminology, right? For spaces, or what's a web implementer, what's a professional web developer. It's such a they kind of blur together, and I think it's I don't know if it's been diminished by having that kind of like nephew effect, but it's at least sort of nondescript, right? To just say I make websites.
Matt Medeiros from the Matt Report said this a while ago on one of his episodes. He said, he thinks there are a lot of web developers that should just call themselves web consultants, because they're not programmers, they're not developers, but what they do is they consult with the client and they can bring together a solution, which might include some design, some development, some off-the-shelf stuff, and they put together a solution for a client. And so really they're a consultant.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that your layman person looking for a website really understands that difference or that nuance. I mean, I would equate it in my experience, right, to like the financial, right, industry in some ways, right? Like for those of us, I mean, I have some training in that, right? But for those of us that don't really have to do it day to day, it's a looking for someone to help you with your company's finance, right? And I'm sure, I bet you've done this, right? It's a very confusing, might not be the right word, but you can find the professional bookkeeper, right? You can find the certified CPA. You can find the professional tax support, right? There's all these sort of like very granular distinctions, and even having taken accounting classes and having to do this in the past, hell, if I can sometimes tell the difference, right? I'm counting on that, and I think maybe there's a lesson here, right? I'm counting on that professional to be honest with me about the limits of their skill, right? And sort of who's the right fit.
This is a really interesting conversation. It's completely off the script, and we've gone completely left of center. But I would just want to explore this for a minute, because this is a really interesting thing. How do you then differentiate? So as a business owner, if you're looking at someone to help you with your company's finances, you want to find the person that's going to add the most value to your company, right? Well, as a service provider, how do you then communicate the value that you're adding to your potential clients as a way of differentiating yourself from all of the other possibilities they have, i.e., getting their nephew, or getting someone else who's competing on price, or getting someone else who is, a hardcore programmer but doesn't understand the business acumen?
Sure. It's a great question. If I don't have an immediate answer, other than just not always being able to think that quickly, it's because I think that at the scale that we're at and the kind of scale that we've been at, I mean, I think I think the people running AOL know what they're looking for in a finance specialist, right? Right. And I think similarly, the kind of client that needs us maybe is a little bit more sophisticated about what it is they're looking for. Which is to say, right, before our contact form on our website made it very clear that the starting price point for a very basic service is $1,500, is not to say we didn't get a ton of, I'm sorry to say, junk, right, for our contact form with insane expectations of what, right, to this conversation of what it means to make a website. So I do think the audience with the right sort of funnel, right, and the right sort of tier of a company does self-select pretty well. It's been a while since I've really run into the quote unquote nephew can do this problem at the tier of work, at the tier of work that we need. So I don't really have that problem to a large degree at this point. I know a lot of people still do, but I do think the kind of client you want, that most professionals, right, want. I would call professionals anybody even going down to the $2,000-$3,000 website, right, sort of simple website range. I do think if you get to that stage, you're probably following that rule of thumb if you pay for what you get. Right? Like, I mean, similar, like I would never expect like a finance specialist, right, that I'm going to find one for $500, right, to help me out for, a year. I have an expectation, that right or not, reasonable or not, that there's an element to pay for what you get. I mean, we can talk about sort of how you differentiate with once you're in that league, but how you differentiate from those. I mean, going back to the babysitter analogy, right? If somebody confused the 16-year-old that can change a diaper with a professional nanny, right? You kind of know what you're looking for. You're kind of self-selecting at this point.
Interesting. So at what point did you decide to put, have you always had price brackets on your contact form on the website, or was that something that you eventually put in place to filter out the tire kickers?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely did not. At the beginning, you'll take whatever lead you can get in day 1 and 2, right? For a while, it was definitely an open-ended form, and I mean, I think there was one point, especially when we started, some of our customers that were larger traffic started throwing our name out there as people that were supporting them. There was one point I remember that we would get easily 7 to 8 inquiries a day, right? And it was very clear pretty quickly that of the whatever, let's do that math, let's say just during the weekdays times 5, right? That of those 40 inquiries in a given week, 10% of them, right, are serious leads, right? Maybe 20%.
Yeah.
Right, are serious leads in a good week, and no one has time to funnel through that. Especially because I do take a certain pride in, even if somebody's not a fit, responding professionally and in a way that leaves a good taste in their mouth. So, I mean, I actually this is a little bit embarrassing to admit. I actually put up what I thought was sort of a tongue-in-cheek funnel, right? That's sort of like teased a little bit people around what their expectations were around price, and took it down about 3 days because I realized that what I thought was sort of teasing and poking fun was actually probably obnoxious, right? And rubbing people the wrong way. And so I chose some. I think I had something like, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was, it was something like, $0 to $1,500. You have nothing else to do.
Yeah.
kind of a thing. Right. I think it was probably at a point where I was just fed up I was probably so pushed to the other direction in terms of the pendulum of being fed up with people emailing us saying, you made 9 to 5 Max website. I have a website that I would like a great looking blog for $700.
Yeah.
Right. That I'm just like, I still have this in me, although I'm professional about it. Like I almost find that offensive.
Yep.
Right. That kind of assumption. It's such a condescending's not the right word, but to me, it's such an offensive, demeaning way. I hope I'm not offending somebody that builds websites for $500, right? But at least for me, it's such an offensive, demeaning way of, of looking at our craft. And right? To me, it's like an artist making a beautiful painting and someone coming up and saying, "I'll give you $2 for it." Right? It's like, what do you think happens here? Right? Do you think there's a magic button that launches a blog? Do you think I shouldn't make more than $10,000 a year? Like what? And in fairness, a lot of it is, I think, just naivete about technology. We can have a whole other philosophical conversation about how certain, especially some giants in the industry, have made certain things so easy, right, online, right? I mean, for all I can get philosophical about companies like Google, right, that really drive the perception of cost of technology, right, down into the floor because you get so much for free. But that's a whole other.
So isn't it then? And I'm just going to take the script and throw it in the bin because I think we're onto something here. Isn't that? I have this conversation all the time, so I'm really glad that we've kind of jumped into it. But isn't that then our responsibility to educate? Because I hear your frustration, and I did exactly the same thing. I got super frustrated with the time wasters, and so we put pricing on our website, and it just eliminated 80% of those inquiries and just saved heaps of time. But isn't it then our responsibility and our job to educate our client and say, well, yes, you've got iWeb on the Mac, and you've got the trial version of Dreamweaver that you downloaded, and you can cobble something together yourself, or you can outsource something to the Philippines or India and pay $400 to get a website made. But working with someone like me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually look, or working with someone like us, we're going to look at your business, we're going to look at what it is you're trying to achieve, we're going to look at your overall objectives, and we're going to custom build a solution that is going to help you get closer to your goals. Now, outsourcing something offshore or using a piece of software to do it is not going to get you that same result. So because the technology itself, you're right, the price has been driven to the floor, isn't that then an opportunity for us to actually show what it is we can do that can't be outsourced and can't be automated?
Yes. So what's going through my head, I'm trying to parse all this. What's going through my head is we may be it's frustrating when we see that, but we may be making more of this problem. We may be making more to this than there really is, right? Like, I don't think anybody has it. I mean, maybe I'm giving people too much credit. I don't think most people that are in any position to make buying decisions, right, for a company, right, even of a few $100s, right? I don't think anybody thinks like CNN or the New York Times was built in iWeb, right, or built in Dreamweaver, or built by a team of, cheap labor,
Yeah.
right, overseas. I don't think anybody thinks that, right? I mean, and there is a place for those tools, right? Like, I'm not trying to be the accountant, going back to that analogy, right? Saying, screw TurboTax, right? That cheap piece of software. Don't they know what I can do, right? For them, I mean, there's a place for you're getting your feet on the ground. You want to put up a classified ad on the web of what you do. There's a place for those tools, right? And I think those tools are important. I mean, I like WordPress because I think people can build something that's nicer than what those tools used to be, right? That gives them a very sort of inexpensive, affordable way to get their online flyer right out the door. And I do think most people at some point. I mean, there's two things that happen, right? Either you're a large enough company that you just know that the kind of thing, that level of sophistication that you need in your website, right, or that you need to convey. Because at the same time, these tools are getting better. Let's remember that like expectations in terms of what a website can do keep rising at the same time, right? So, okay, great. Dreamweaver can now do menus nicely, but okay, meanwhile, there's a whole other expectation around what it means for a menu to be responsive. Right, and what it means for menus to have sort of like these super navs, right, or roll down the page with you, right? So the technology, or parallax, or pick CSS, or pick your poison, right? Like what the standards and code can do are rising, if anything, probably faster than the tools are able to keep up with, right? Then, so there's somebody knows like I'm not going to wrap my head around. It's not worth my time to wrap my head around what it means to build. So I'm a big company. We have money. We invest in doing things the right way. We pay that premium, right? Or the other thing that happens, right, which is. We all have these stories, right? If somebody goes and tries that way, somebody tries to do it on the cheap, right? Somebody tries to outsource it, super inexpensively or build it themselves. And I think they realize pretty quickly that that gets you only so far, right? That gets you only so far unless you decide it's which is maybe where some of us come from, that you want to be a web developer. Right. I mean, I don't know many people that have tried to do like the build it yourself, even on like a WordPress.com, right? That have tried to do the build it yourself and then grown their company to a certain point and decided that that's going to be the answer. That's my solution for the next generation. Right. Just like, I mean, my first year, 10up's first year, I did my own taxes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I pulled up, I grabbed a pretty inexpensive piece of software and valued my time in a way that I could plug at it for a day and do it well enough myself, right? But then at some point, I don't have the time or inclination. I have the budget. I know that that's not as optimum as it could be for my company. And I know it's time to spend more on the service. So I don't want to be. I'm not the guy that's going to be shame on cheap solutions, shame on the software that makes it easy, shame on the 16-year-old learning. I mean, I was that guy once, right? Yeah. Trying to build the free website. So I don't want to. I'm not a hand wringer in this respect, right? I do think there are people that have unrealistic expectations. I think they weed themselves out, right? I think they come to a realization, or they start with something cheap, and it's good that there are solutions to get them to a V1, and then they grow up and they realize it's time to be with leveraging those V1s, right? And realize it's time to be more sophisticated.
So it's horses for courses. It's what you need to do at your stage of the business. So there's this, I see there's this huge band of small businesses. And there's this huge bracket of WordPress freelancers and WordPress consultants, call them what you will, who are servicing small business clients, who are constantly having this conversation around price, because usually the small business owner, the money that they're investing in a website is their savings. It's not, they don't have a marketing budget. They don't have like $5,000 set aside this year to build a new website. They know they need a new website. They go to do it. They get a quote from a web developer. They go, wow, $4,000 for this website. That's like money I got to take out of the savings to pay for this. And then all of a sudden there's this conversation around, why does it cost this much? Why does it cost this much? And I think it's because the conversation is the wrong conversation, that the conversation very quickly gets down to, well, the technology is really cheap. It doesn't take that long. And we're having a conversation about time and materials. We're not having a conversation about how this is actually going to impact your business and how this is going to help your business grow and generate more revenue. Now, obviously, guys operating at your level, you're having that conversation with your clients because your clients understand that. But how can a freelancer who's working with a small business client, how do freelancers, which I'm sure you were at some point, how do you educate smaller clients that this is an investment in your business, it's not an expense?
I think I don't think there's a simple answer to your question. It's a good question. But I think we may be underestimating that person a little bit, right? Like, it's not that they don't. I think for most, and it's so hard to generalize, right? I think at least for a portion of them, whether it's most or not, they know it's an investment. They wouldn't be doing it if they didn't think it was an investment in their business. They just thought it was. I mean, there's no regulation that says you have to have a website, right, to run your business. They fundamentally understand that this is an investment that they're making. I think where we have to be realistic, right, is being honest about what that return on investment, right, for their business is, right. I mean, I'm not quite sure how we're defining. I mean, small business to me is a nebulous, right, phrase. Like, I mean, I worked for many years in government contracting where small business is considered less than 150, right? So I smile sometimes when we talk about what small business means. If we're talking about somebody that works from home and makes $20,000 a year and maybe doesn't want to do a lot more than that, I mean, I'm not always sure we think honestly about what that return on investment is without sort of maybe disingenuously cooking the books a little bit ourselves, right? I do think it's important to talk about return on investment. But let's also remember that the return on investment is comparative, right? So they are comparing it to other quotes that they're getting. And I think we need not lose sight of the fact, again, going back to the previous conversation, that there is a place and a time and a customer for the inexpensive solution, right? I think Matt Mullenweg used to call WordPress.com the gateway drug, right, for WordPress, which is that idea, which is here's the simple, free, get to know it, build the first version of your blog without having to spend, maybe if you want to buy a domain, right, you spend $30, right? You don't have to get a consultant, right, to come and help you. And then we should cheer for the idea that there's a simple way for them to get in there and start building their brand, right, and start getting themselves out there. When that succeeds, right, then they'll realize it's time to invest more. And every time that they grow a little bit more, they'll find somebody in a different tier, right, and invest more money. I mean, I think, I genuinely, again, I think it's something that we can share. I think it's a rising tide, lifting all boats kind of situation for these tools, these easy tools to exist for somebody to get to a phase one, right, to get their business to stage one. Now, if somebody's making $200,000 a year in their small business, right, and they don't understand why they should spend more than $2,000, yes, I'd say that it's important to educate them about the return on investment and what the difference is between a site that costs this much and that much, and why at their stage of the business it's worth that extra investment. I guess I agree with the premise that those guys need to be educated. Maybe I'm just because I've closed down the funnel. I'm just not convinced it's that large of a pool.
Sure. Just, you mentioned something about WordPress.com being the gateway drug. Are you once you get off WordPress.com, you might need a consultant. It's kind of weird that everyone I speak to that uses WordPress loves WordPress because it's easy to use. But there's this whole industry that's grown up of WordPress consultants building solutions for other businesses because, frankly, WordPress isn't that easy to use. So unless you know what you're doing, I mean, it's easy when you know how. So do you ever get nervous that, wow, we've built this business out of being WordPress consultants? What happens if WordPress gets so easy to use that you no longer need a consultant? Does that ever cross your mind?
I mean, yes, it crosses my mind. I just don't think it's reality, right? Like, I think what happens is, like, again, if you look at what a website expectation was, right, in the late 1990s, right, and this is true across technology, right, and you look at what it would cost if somebody showed you a comp of a 90s website and said, what would it cost to build this? Yeah, it's a joke, right? You could say I could give you something 10 times better for, probably $400 or $500. I'll install WordPress for you, right? Right. But at the same time that happens, us professionals, as our time is freed up and those things become easy and routine, we have moved the ball so far down the court, right, in terms of what a website can do, and that technology is always growing, is always changing, always improving, right? So what I do think WordPress consultants have to be. Let me restart that sentence. For a company like us, it doesn't overwhelmingly concern me, right? I think how I construct this sentence, because this is actually kind of counterintuitive, right? For us, it doesn't worry me because I know that the level of service and complexity that we're solving, we're going to keep moving down the field, right, as technology becomes more complex. and able to do the bigger and better things that are always coming out. Every year there's a new, every year, every 2 years there's a new thing, right? That people want to do with their website. There's a new feature that's hot. There's a new technology. There's a new way to do things, right? That's just not going to be baked and automated into a tool that quickly, right? So we'll move down that curve. In fact, what I might worry about, right, is that consultant that you talk about, right, that junior. I do worry that people that are just getting into the field, right, that the barriers to entry are getting harder, right, for them. I do think that for the person that just wanted when I was in high school, right, and learning coding, right, it was very easy to get your foot in the door and do something professional because what was brand new and fresh was HTML and CS and basic CSS, right, was semantic markup, right, and that's easy. I mean, don't mean to be dismissive, but fundamentally, let's be honest, it's easy, right, to get your head around that if you want to learn it, right, and so many of us, you're in my age group, right, grew up with the technology, right, and we were able to grow professionally at the pace where the change of technology was just right to grow with it. I actually am wary, this is a really weird tangent, right? I'm actually really wary when I see things like WordPress core have more and more requirements to contribute, right, and develop, right? So now if you want to contribute to WordPress, fundamentally, right, how much in the last year, right, it was just typical of many growing platforms, how much in the last year do you now have to master compared to 3 years ago, right? You need to understand JavaScript much better because that's increasingly becoming essential, right, to where WordPress is going. I would go so far as to say if you really want to make significant contributions, you have to start learning Backbone, right, and fairly, I don't know if complex is the right word, but certainly another skill set to learn, right? I think we've integrated SaaS, right, into core, right? So you have to understand SaaS and preprocessors, right, to do it. We're now requiring unit testing for PHP patches. You have to understand concepts of unit testing, right? So do I worry, if anything, here's the weird part that's counterintuitive. If anything, I think companies like 10up that are ahead of the curve and have very strong engineering teams are going to be more needed, right? It's actually going to increase the need for us as the simple stuff becomes easier. As the simple stuff becomes easier, the hard stuff becomes harder, right? The simple stuff is easier because the technology and the automation is more sophisticated. The technology and the automation is more sophisticated because we've made the tool more sophisticated, right? So it actually becomes more important. Somebody's going to hit a wall sooner using the product doing a hard thing, right? Getting into code, and going to need us sooner than they may have historically been able to use just the bootstrapped, right, consultant. But I do think that the bootstrap consultant needs to be worried. The junior guy, right, needs to be worried about the tool becoming simpler, right, than what he can do. Not just because the tool is taking away some of what it is that he typically needs to build for them, like a customizer that lets you do CSS changes on your own, but because the barrier to say, all right, fine, I'm willing to make that next leap and become more of an engineer, right, understand what it means to contribute to core and understand more of the PHP underpinnings, I fear that those walls are becoming high to climb over. Right, that to decide you want to be a core contributor today and make a PHP patch is 5 times harder, and we've made it a lot harder in the last year, right, than it was 3 years ago, right? And so a lot of people are going to just say, I can't do that, right? I can't climb that wall, right? Or that there's too many pieces of technology getting involved here, and I have to pull back, right, a little bit from this. I also think it's dangerous for WordPress, right, a little bit, because WordPress, if we're going to be honest with each other, right, WordPress hasn't risen in market share just because it's unequivocally the best tool, right? There's other very good tools right out there. WordPress has risen in market share because it's the easiest, right? Not to say that it's easy. It's been the easiest, right? It's been the easiest for that guy that wants to bootstrap and is hungry and wants to build his own business to understand the technology, to screw around with a theme template and understand how to build it and really bring himself up step by step while creating value, right? And so it's fostered a huge marketplace of sellers, right? That, again, the grassroots that then raise up people like us too, because there's so many people that use the platform that need somebody more sophisticated. I worry, we've gone so far off the script, but I worry, right, that those, and I need to write about this at some point, right? But I worry that those grassroots are going to start fading away. I worry that we've become a more elegant platform, right? We've integrated things like SaaS and unit testing that make for a better product, right? A better tool. but at the same time, we've made it a more complex tool, and we've taken away those low barriers to entry, right?
Do you think that it's a very interesting point that you raise. Do you think that the marketplaces, like as long as there are people selling themes and plugins relatively inexpensively, that I can, as long as installing WordPress is relatively simple, which it is, I can install WordPress. I can, for less than $100, I can get a good theme. I can get, a handful of plugins and make this thing kind of almost do what I need it to do within a couple of hours, regardless of whether it has pre-processor support, unit testing, backbone. Because as a bootstrap business owner, I don't really know about that stuff. I don't really care. I just need an outcome.
Yeah. So. Yes. So I mean, there are always. So when we talk about when we talk about sort of the people that just need a consultant to do anything, right? I always bring it back and remind myself of auto mechanic work, right? I'm the idiot that he doesn't even know how to do an oil change, right? I'm the guy that I don't care what the heck is wrong with my car. I don't care if you could tell me that it's really something I could learn in an hour. My brain has just decided I'm not interested, and I have no room. And I will pay you that premium to take it to you, the mechanic, to do it for me. Right. So yeah, there's always a place for that. There's always a place for a segment of the market, right, of people that have the money and don't want to be bothered, right, to do it, and will just pay for somebody that's smart and has a premium of time that the other guy doesn't have, right, to go just do it for them and figure it out for them. The setup that'll always be there, right? That'll be there for WordPress.com sites, right? There'll be people that just want somebody to tutor them and do it for them. Sure. Right, and set it up. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised. I'm sometimes surprised how many people pay somebody to go in and even manage their content for them. Yeah. Right, in WordPress after they've set up a CMS. Yeah. So there'll always be a place for that too. I guess I'm referring to what the middle looks like, right? There's always every market, right, going to be a place for that high-end consultant, right? Especially as the technology and the vision for what big is gets bigger, right? And there's always a place for I just don't have time. I've got money. Go do it for me. Right place. What I worry about is the people that are just started as to go do it for me, being able to climb the wall, right, to somebody higher end.
And do you think that'll be due to eventually a shortage of WordPress developers because the barrier to entry in the technology becomes too difficult? So as a consultant, for example, I can build a sustainable business as long as I know that I've got access to good designers and good developers, because my job is to put together a solution for the business. But if I don't have access to good developers because they're all off now learning Ruby or Node because WordPress just got too difficult, then my business is in strife if I'm just consulting on WordPress, yeah?
Trying to nail down the question in there. I mean,
so the question is, do you think that eventually there will be a shortage of WordPress developers because 10up and WebDev have employed them all?
No, I mean, we're for all joking aside, we're pretty far away from that, obviously. I don't know the answer. I mean, a healthy, growing ecosystem needs developers, right? Obviously, it needs a lot of developers. And it needs to be easy enough. It needs to have a low enough barriers to entry that lower price market. Number one, that there is a low price market, right? We need the low price market, right? WordPress, there's as much opportunity at the high end of WordPress as there is now because of how easy it is to get your foot in that door.
Yep, I absolutely agree.
Right? So that's important. That has a lot to do with our philosophy of why we give back, right? And want to support a community more broadly than just our own brand, right? It's essential that grassroots, that those inexpensive solutions remain healthy, right? I don't think we want to be like Adobe CQ5 or something, right, where there's a very tiny market, right, but just a very narrow, extreme high-end market. Because I think at the end of the day, if those are your choices, you're going to probably choose more often the commercial non-open solution, right, that has the roadmap, right, and has the big company name behind it. So that's essential, right? The other thing that's important, I obviously talked a little bit about this in my article about WordPress as an app platform, right, is the good talent being attracted, right, to a platform, or to the extent, which I think is where WordPress is today, to the extent that not all of the best talent, because I'm going to say something honest here, right, and say a lot of the best talent isn't interested in WordPress, right, in the ecosystem, and you then have to have a decent ecosystem of people that can climb up to that point, right? They can get into WordPress, say this is easy, and then every day learn a little bit more and challenge themselves. And before they know it, they become very good, very skilled developers. I mean, that's really where, in many ways, that's really why PHP got to where it was, right? It wasn't because it was a beautifully elegant language, right? It wasn't because the developers of the day that had climbed that ladder for 10 to 15 years on C++, right, thought it was a brilliant, right, programming language. It was because it was approachable, right? It was because it was good enough functionally, right, and it was approachable, and so a lot of people that were learning or just needed to pull something together quickly, right, on the web could get their teeth in there, right. But then you can get into this in every industry. You can get to this weird cycle, right, where the people that feel like they've made it try to close the door behind them, right, or forget the importance of that. They become those great engineers and they start making the tool more complicated, right, and more convoluted to suit their needs, right. There are people in the enterprise for WordPress ecosystem that I think actually err in that direction, right? That they think WordPress needs to become a more sophisticated, right, like enterprise ERM, right, kind of platform. I don't think that way. I think there's plugins. I think there are modules. I think that I think we actually want to be wary of the life cycle of product, from consumer-driven tastes, right, to overly complicated product that only appeals to a niche.
Interesting. Well, it's been a very interesting philosophical rant on the state of WordPress and where it's headed. Let me just get back and talk a little bit about the business side of things. 10up is undoubtedly one of the largest, if not the largest, dedicated WordPress agency on the planet, as far as I can find. And it's grown pretty quickly. How did you handle the growth?
Sure. Actually, before I even answer the handle the growth section, I want to react to something in the way that sort of you framed it. So what you said is true, although it may come as a surprise to some people that I don't like to be considered a WordPress agency.
Sure.
Right? I think of us as, it's fascinating to me oftentimes knowing that of companies that invests back in WordPress, that feels, I guess what we're talking about feels like a part of that WordPress family, right? I agree that we're larger than that ecosystem, but my mind is about, our mission is to make web publishing and content management simple and fun, right? We believe strongly that WordPress today, and we don't see a better tool on the horizon, is the tool that enables that, so we focus and reinvest heavily right, in that platform. But I frame us as, that's how I frame our agency, right? Not WordPress as an agency. When I think of, I think it's important in our ecosystem, right? And this maybe provides some context for even like controversial remarks I made about like business, right, in WordPress and like WordCamps and stuff. When I think of big, I chuckle when people describe 10up as like the real big one, right? Because what I'm looking at as role models are agencies that have hundreds, sometimes thousands of people.
Sure.
Right. I was in New York City last week at a very, very large PR advertising agency. Just like put this in perspective, when people look at 10up and go, wow, right? And I love when people do that, right? But just to put this in perspective, right? In the last 10 years, they grew their digital agency from about 40, 50 people to over 1,000 people, right? So I just think it's, I feel like I need to like stop and put it in perspective when people talk about, 42 people, this is, how did you build such a, how did you build such a monster company? You're done, right? You've made it to the top. It's flattering that we get that, I think, that love within the WordPress family, which is really what we're talking about, right? Correct. People that don't just happen to you. And by the way, this agency that I'm talking about, this PR agency, uses WordPress predominantly, right? Not only WordPress, but it is their predominant CMS.
Yep.
Right. And there are other very large agencies that use WordPress as their predominant CMS, right?
Yeah, sure.
But they don't tweet about WordPress, right? They don't participate in podcasts. They don't sponsor WordCamps, right? Or give back to core, right? So they sort of fit a different class. But are they WordPress agencies?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess it's contextual because you describe yourself as a full-service agency. The context, I guess, for our audience is that our audience are all WordPress freelancers and consultants and developers and designers, and they look to someone like 10up or they look at web dev and they think, okay, these guys are the big agencies who specialize in WordPress because you've got such a visible profile in the WordPress ecosystem. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. And I do think we should be more inviting, to keep taking this off track, we should be more inviting, and we should have our eye, I'd like to see our community have its eyes more open to beyond that like 40, 50 scale of people that are really using this software. in a big way. I think we should do. We've seen some of this recently, and I think we could all do a better job of inviting them and inviting some of those leaders to participate in our community and give us a different class of role model. Some schmeal like me. But anyways, so from schmeal like me to how did we build so fast, right?
Yeah, so how did you handle the growth? Logistically, I mean, I understand that it takes cash flow to handle growth. It takes human resources. It takes systems. It takes processes. It takes a whole bunch of stuff to grow something that quickly and not fall in a hole. How did you, in a snapshot, if you can, how did you handle that growth? What was the key thing that you did to keep that going?
So let me ask you a question, right, that will dovetail into my answer. What is it you think I sell?
That's a very good question. Are we talking? So I believe.
Put aside SEO slides and some experiments, obviously, they're doing in product,
Sure.
right? Fundamentally.
So from my understanding, I believe that you sell. You're a full service web agency, so that you sell websites for clients, to clients.
That's what we produce, but it's not what any agency sells. So put you on the spot a moment longer here. What does any agency? What fundamentally is the product that an agency provides?
What?
If you want me to lead you a little further down the path of giving this away, what is it when we bill? What are we usually selling? What are they buying when we bill them?
What are they buying?
Yeah. What are they typically buying from us?
A service.
So that's the right answer. So so let's go a little deeper than service, right? So what is a service? Any service, right? What are you selling?
Time.
What is a service? Yeah. Well, so my answer is going to be people, right?
Gotcha.
Like the way I think about what our fundamental product is that we sell is people's time, right? We are selling a team. We are selling people, right? We are selling whether it's fixed fee or value pricing, which everybody knows I think is a little bit height of an idea, right? Because I don't think value pricing is very different, right? Whether it's fixed fee, time and materials, value-based, fundamentally what my product is my time, right? And the time of people on our team, right? So that leads into your answer. What this is all about is people, right? So I come from, what's enabled me to do this is experience, right? And good mentors, right? And past experience, right? So I spent at consultancies, some, by our standards, large, like government contracting, where I was in leadership positions, right? 2 small digital agencies that grew up, right? I knew that not a secret, right? That fundamentally I understood that what we sell is people's time, right? And labor. And so what that means is from day one of the company, right? And this is part of why we're distributed. From day one of the company, I knew that the secret to us being able to grow, to being able to win new projects, be able to accept new projects, is always having a pipeline of people, right, that want to work with us, right? It's, I think I like to call it, maybe a little bit too clever for my own good, just in time labor, right? I would describe my model, right? So if people know just-in-time manufacturing, right, the idea is that the stuff is ready and shipped to the manufacturer for parts just as it's needed, right, instead of sitting in a warehouse. I have always, including right now, I always have a group of people of varying cost and talent, right, and quality, a bench of people that are interested, want to work here. Some of whom have been trialed, some of whom we just know do good work, as well as an overflow of sort of what I would call sort of emergency contractor resources that we'll pay a premium for, right, that can do the work. What that enables me to do is to be able to say yes when I don't necessarily have someone sitting around today, full-time at the company now, able to do a product. But it enables me to do with a reasonable 3 to 4 at the outset, 6 weeks of lead time. It lets me be able to say yes to just about any worthwhile opportunity, right? And I think the mistake a lot of agencies make that want to grow is thinking only in the bubble of who they have on their team, right? I would go so far, controversially say, I am mystified by agencies that put this little like thermometer bubble, right, like on their website of saying how full am I, right? Because what that says to me is you don't know how to think like a business. I'm going to be a little bit controversial again. You don't know how to think like a business development person, right, or business owner, because in your mind, there's the people that work with you and that are on your team, and that's all there is. That's all the resources you have available to you, right, to get a project done. I don't think that way, right? I want to always keep a close tab on what the current team's availability is so we don't overstaff, right, on people. but I'm always prepared and have people that I'm not paying today that I can get on board pretty quickly, right? That can come in and enable me to say yes, right? That's I mean, now in fairness, right, to couch a little bit, right, there are people that just don't want to work with the team. There are people that want to just do their own thing, right? They just want to be a freelancer, don't want to be responsible for anybody else, want to take a vacation and not just don't have either the risk tolerance, right, or the interest.
Sure.
Right, in being responsible for somebody else. And that's fine. And then you are in this sort of fixed bubble of how many resources you have available to you. There are people that grow their company to a certain size and say 10, 15 people is all I ever want to do. I don't want to grow into that next size. And that's fine. That's not the way I think. I think in terms of growth. I think in terms of how to build something bigger, right? And the trick there, right, is to always have a plan, right, for how to say yes.
So on a smaller scale, if you're a freelancer or maybe you're working in a team of 2 or 3, what I'm hearing is the way that you could apply that is if you've got your processes and your systems optimized internally well enough, that will give you the confidence to say yes because you know that you've got the structure in the business to support that decision.
Yes. Yep. It could be when you're one person that you just have freelancers that you like working with, that you're okay, maybe only making a small margin or almost no margin on. It could be other partners. But we've seen, I think, a lot in the WordPress ecosystem. Of people that haven't grown up and started to form agencies, or people just having like little. We see a lot of these. I see a lot of these like little designer teams up with a developer, teams up with an SEO guy, right? These little boutique, 1-2 person shows that don't really want to grow a company, but team up with each other, right? To be able to do some of that load balancing, right? But the fundamental answer is you shouldn't be, whether it's through other freelancers, whether it's through being ready to hire. You should always have a plan for what it means to be able to take on more, right? You shouldn't broken companies hire and find resources when they need them.
Yeah.
Right. When they've discovered that they need them.
Yeah.
Right. Companies that successfully grow always have a plan before they need it. Right. To add more help, add more resources. I used to have back in that defense contractor. I used to have a mentor who was quite a character who would come into my office, right, and talk about how he hadn't interviewed anybody in the last 2 weeks as a company. He would literally say things like, if you're not always adding people, always interviewing, you're circling the drain. Right? Like, which is a little bit over the top, right?
Yeah.
His way of describing, but there's a truth in it, right? There's a fundamental truth in it, right? That if you're not thinking about how you're going to grow, right, how you're going to add talent.
I just read Adam Lezinski's book Inside Apple, which talks a lot about how Steve Jobs built Apple and how then he resurrected it in the mid-90s again, and he talks a lot about that. Steve was always looking for great talent and recruiting and actively hiring.
The other thing, I think that's right. But the other thing that I've said publicly on these like 8 panels and stuff before is that one of the biggest things, and it goes right along those lines, and it's funny because people think of Jobs as an ego guy, and he was an ego guy. I can probably be an ego guy sometimes, right? Nonetheless, he knew what a lot of, I think, some really smart freelancers don't accept, which is there are people that are smarter than me at things I do.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Right. There's a lot. I think a lot of little freelance 1-person, 2-person shows suffer. I mean, how many times do you hear? Given we're talking about ego, probably the most, I think, actually egocentric comment about your business that there is, which is, I wish I could clone myself.
Yeah.
Right. Like now, I know what you're really saying there is just like you wish you could take your workload and divide it between 2 people.
Yep.
But I know it's not intended as an egocentric comment, but if you really sort of peel back, it's an egocentric thing to say because what you're really saying to me is nobody else can do what you do. Right.
Yeah. Which is
you're convinced that there's nobody else that can handle some of the things that are on your plate, let alone better than you.
Yep. And you actually surprise yourself when you hire people and you delegate, and it's surprising that actually how much better they are at doing it than you, and it's quite humbling, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean I think everyone at 10 Up, there's something that they can do better than me. Certainly, everybody on our leadership team, our vice president of consulting services, Jess, 10 times better a project manager than I am. Vaskin, our vice president of strategic engineering, 10 times better at thinking about things like alternative testing or in big picture engineering. I mean, John Jacoby, when it comes to like really hard engineering, problems, immensely better than me. I mean, Helen on what it means to sort of like, do that sort of community fostering and think about experience and I mean, they're all people that are better than me, right, at what they do. Yeah, I mean, so yes, and then some.
What's the one part of your business that you'd like to fix?
I think this is I think this tends to be a perpetual problem for growing companies. I think our company is, I think that the pace at which our infrastructure in terms of internal tools and systems is always trying to catch up with our growth, right? So like the organization of like some of our tools internally are getting around different staging sites without log in, log out, right? Mechanisms to know what other people on the team are working on without it being like a tedious looking through hip chat, right? Some of like the infrastructure of the company, right, needs to catch up, which is something we're working on, needs to catch up, with the scale of our team. And we compensate for that. It's not anything that's hampering us in a serious way, right? But there are definitely, you start to see inefficiencies. And I think it's what we call growing pains, right?
Yeah.
Growing pains is a funny thing because every company that I think I've worked at that grows says they're going through growing pains, whether they're at 10 people or 100 people. I don't think any growing company stops having growing pains, right? But there's this reality of like every time you move into that, every time you grow, you start to have new problems. So people that get to like that 10, 15, you start to grow into that space where you can't as the owner keep doing your operations, right? You can't be doing payroll, right? You can't be overseeing like finance, right? You need to start bringing in infrastructure, right, to catch up and do that. At our size, right, I think there's another layer of it. Like we just hired a few months ago our first dedicated business development person. We have our next starting soon, right? We're at an infrastructure scale where I, as the owner with a couple of my VPs, can't afford the time to be focused on business development, right? We're now getting to the point, we're now at that point where like we still have contractors doing it, but it starts to feel like, well, is finance something we should have someone dedicated, right, to? We have people on our team, me, one of our vice presidents, a contractor that we use, right, that know it, right, that can do it, but you start to get to the point where you feel like, okay, it takes enough time that it's annoying, right, to the people for who it's a hobby project, but it's not quite at that point where you can justify saying,
sure,
let's bring in someone to focus on that. So I do think we're at this, I guess, long-winded answer as I tend to be, right, but I think we have infrastructure in the company, both in terms of side jobs, things that are still side jobs for some people, tools that we use in the company that need to catch up.
Gotcha. You recently invested in SEO Slides, which we're going to mention again in the competition in a moment. This is the first foray into product for 10up as opposed to client services. Is this something that you will see more of from 10up? Is it a space that you're going to play more in the future?
The short answer is yes. I think any product that we commit to will be serious about, right, and in it for the long term. I mean, in no sense of the word do we plan to pivot, right, and become a product company. Agency will always very, you should never say always, right? Who knows what things look like in 20 years, right? But agency we don't see at this point any sort of future, right, where agency is not the center of what we do, right, in the main way we make money. I think we're going to diversify in that direction a little bit. We're going to get some things out there that we think provide value, problems that haven't been solved by other people, and we'll see how it does. I'm very curious to see how over the long term something like SEO Slides, some of these other products that we'll work on, which are much less grand, I would say, in scope, than what SEO Slides is trying to accomplish. We'll see how they do.
In a nutshell,
I will say I'm not going in with any sort of sense of like this is easy cake, right? I think I think a lot of people have bad ideas about how big the product market is in WordPress. So we'll see.
In a nutshell, why SEO? What does SEO Slides offer that something like SlideShare doesn't? SEO Slides, for those that don't know, is a presentation plugin for WordPress. Allows you to build presentations and then have those presentations embedded or used as a shortcode on other WordPress sites. So why would I use SEO Slides instead of SlideShare?
It's a great question, and I think you've gone further than most in identifying that SlideShare is really our competitor. I think people have incorrectly pointed to things that are incorrectly think of like PowerPoint or other online slideshow builders, right? Because that's not the center of what it is we do. Our question is, I think the fundamental thing we're trying to solve and address, when you really break it down, is a fundamentally simple question, which is no different than why WordPress instead of like Squarespace, right? or a hosted, product like that. And I think the answer for most people, the philosophical answer, is because we believe in content ownership, right? We believe in control and ownership and the freedoms of open source, right? So I think our fundamental question, right, is if we agree that being able to digitize your slideshows provides value, right, and distribute them provides value in SEO in terms of its content, that you should be capitalizing on, right, provides value in terms of directing people back to your site, right? If we agree that this is fundamentally content that provides value, our fundamental question is, why are you giving it away to this proprietary, controlled, not yours platform called SlideShare? Right? Why would you not want to host that on your own website? Why would you not want your branding instead of SlideShare's branding? Right, when your slideshow gets embedded everywhere, why would you not want those backlinks coming to your site instead of SlideShare? Why would you not want the conversation on your site instead of SlideShare? I mean, did you know that SlideShare charges you for the analytics about how your slideshows are performing? They charge you way more than we're charging even for the premium version, right, of SEO Slides to be able to get data about how your slides are performing, right, on the web. You don't have control over the conversation. If you search and there's great content in your slideshow, your website doesn't come up.
Yeah.
Right, as the source. And there's companies out there that are doing, going to conferences and giving talks, have this sort of PowerPoint culture, right, that are doing this all the time. Right. So our question is, why do you not want that content on your website, just like a blog post, just like a page, driving traffic right to your site?
Yeah. It's a good
We're not trying to solve creation. There's some really neat stuff in there that's beta, but pretty neat around creation. I think we're pretty proud of like our basic Canvas editor. You can drag and drop and create slides, but that's not fundamentally what we're trying to do. I think people that are trying to build like people trying to build like web-based presentation tools think that this is ever going to, whether that technology moves to the web, whether they're going to compete with Microsoft and Apple, right, or even Google on like slideshow making creation tools, right, I think is silly. Right, almost. I mean, yeah, 10up's going to go toe-to-toe with Apple and create a better keynote. Right.
But you can create...
This is the tool everyone except maybe geeks, right, wants to make their slideshows. I mean, get real, right? Like maybe if we have thousands of people and Apple quality engineers at some point, do you need the WordPad equivalent? Do you need something for basic people that want to throw something together quickly? Right, that want to do it right on their web? Yeah, sure. But that's not what we're trying to solve. What we're trying to solve, and I think we are solving, is distribution.
Distribution, yeah.
Right, of content that you're creating. I mean, my dream, I'm giving this away here, right, but I've said this elsewhere, my dream is the day when there's an export, when built into Keynote, there's an export to my web, to SEO Slides. Option that saves that Keynote slide right to your website.
Yeah, that was my next sort of thing. I did a presentation yesterday at a speaking engagement up in Brisbane for a bunch of mortgage brokers, and I built the presentation in Keynote just because it's so easy to build beautiful, gorgeous presentations in Keynote, but I can then just dump that out as a PDF and import that into SEO Slides, right?
Yep.
And
eventually I want to...
Because I use SlideShare for that. I use SlideShare to distribute my slides and put it up online and drive people to my SlideShare page, and I'm giving all that traffic to SlideShare, whereas using SEO Slides, I could be driving all that traffic back to my website.
And you control it, right?
Yeah.
What if SEO Slides decides they want to start charging you?
Yeah.
Or they want to put ads on your content?
Yeah.
Or they want to start making you pay if you have more than 10 slides?
Yeah.
What if they just go out of business?
Yeah. That's right.
Right? I mean, I just think... I mean, as technology gets better on the web, right, the idea that you're going to give your content to a third party to host it, right, it still makes sense for very expensive operations like video, right?
Yeah.
Very expensive, bandwidth intensive. Slides are not bandwidth intensive,
Yeah.
right, or heavy on a website by modern standards. So I don't know why, any more than you want to go to some other site, right, to put your blog post there and then embed it on your WordPress site, right? It doesn't even make sense to me, except for the technology being there, why you want to give it away.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the only reason it makes sense is because someone else is providing you the opportunity, the technology to do that, and there isn't another option. So that's why people use SlideShare.
Just like people use Flash for video and Flash for animations.
Yeah.
Right, once, because they've made it very frictionless.
Yeah.
Right, to do that, right? And so our goal with SEO Slides, right, is to make it just as frictionless to distribute your own slide content through your website. We think we've made it pretty easy with the PDF importer to go from Keynote to PowerPoint. If you go to Keynote to SlideShare, you still have to export to PDF, right, and wait for them to crunch it and import it. So we're providing SaaS infrastructure, right, to make that, I think we'll make it even easier, but just about as easy, right, on your web. And we'll keep investing in tools that make your content more exposed and make it easier. And, again, my dream someday is just like when you create a video in iMovie, right, and you say, hey, post this to Vimeo, post this to YouTube, post this to the dominant distribution mechanisms, right? Even if we have to code our own PowerPoint plugin at some point, right? My vision is when you're ready to save, you save it to your website.
Nice. What's the URL for SEO Slides, Jake?
SEOslides.com.
SEOslides.com.
You can also find it by searching for SEO Slides in the WordPress plugin install panel.
Sweet.
The base plugin is free. It'll always be free to distribute your slides, extensible, and modular. The only thing that we will ever charge for is infrastructure, right? Like SaaS infrastructure for things like distribution and further, optimization for SEO of your slides.
Sure. So here's the thing. With this competition, I'm going to give away a $50 Amazon voucher. I want you guys to go and check out SEOslides.com right now. And then I want you to come back and leave a comment under this video and tell Jake the number one feature that you would like to see in a future iteration of SEO Slides. And I'll get Jake to swing by in a couple of weeks and have a look through the comments and award the prize. Sound good?
Sounds great to me.
Awesome. Okay. Hey, this has been...
It's a free copy of SEO Slides, right?
Say again?
It's a free copy of the free plugin, right?
That's right. I will give away a free copy of the free plugin. This is a long interview, but I'm telling you, this has been fascinating insight, and we've waxed lyrical about a whole bunch of WordPress stuff. Let's just quickly dive through the Elevate round now. This is a series. For those of you that don't know, WP Elevation is a business accelerator program to help WordPress freelancers and consultants build a business. So I'm basically trying to help a whole bunch of people build businesses to compete with 10up and WebDev. Hope that's okay with you, Jake. So, a series of quick questions and quick answers just off the top of your head. What's the number one thing any freelancer or consultant needs to know?
There are people that are better than you.
Nice. What's the best thing you've ever done to find new customers?
Do phenomenal work for our current customers and build good relationships with people with complementary services.
Nice. How do you stop competing on price?
Can I give a little bit of a longer answer to this one?
Sure.
Or do I have to keep it? Is this like the fire round or something?
Yeah, it's like the fire round, but that's okay. There's no rules.
I would say reframe. Okay, here's the fire round answer. Reframe your question to how do you convince people that you provide more value? It's not about price. It's about value.
Awesome. Any tips on writing better proposals?
Don't use generic proposal templates.
Interesting.
Take the time to craft your proposal, even if you think you'll lose. You can still win in leaving a good impression when you lose, right? When you write a proposal, always take the time. Not to say don't reuse anything, but always take the time to craft your proposal a bit. Favorite
tool or system for CRM?
I'm so not the tool guy. We use Pipeline.
Okay. Pipeline. What's the best way to keep a project and a client on track?
Great project managers.
Any ideas for getting referrals from your existing clients?
It's no more complicated than just do great work.
Awesome.
All the techniques in the world aren't gonna get them to refer somebody to you if you do bad work. And frankly, all the referral bonus programs are just gimmicks because the truth is if you do great work for them, they're happy to tell someone looking that you're good.
What's the number one thing you can do to differentiate yourself?
The number one thing to do to differentiate yourself, start by at the beginning, hone in on what you're really good at. And as you get larger, think about what you can add that nobody else can add.
Nice. Very, very, very sound advice. What's the future for, we're officially out of the Elevate round now. What's the future for 10up?
The future for 10up is to stay true to our mission, which is to make online publishing simple and fun. And I don't really honestly know that I have a better answer for you than that. I mean, there's very micro things we can talk about in terms of, how we scale, right, and how we diversify, which we've touched on, right, in terms of product. But I think fundamentally, it's just to keep doing that at whatever the right scale is to do that, right? I think a lot of people from the outside, because we talk about when we add people in our team, and we're pretty proud of the team we built, think that it's all just about number of people. It's not, right? The future is whatever the right scale is that we can keep helping people making online publishing amazing. And I would remind people that the way I phrase that is not just service, right? Consulting and services is part of it. But I think we'll do any number of things that stay true to that fundamental vision, whether it's SEO Slides, right, or other products that stay true to that vision of making publishing online simple and fun.
And where will Jake Goldman be in 3 years? Will you still be at the helm of TenUp?
Maybe on a beach, sipping Australia, sipping a cocktail, I hope.
Nice, good one. We spoke about that at Pressnomics, actually. Spoke about getting you out here.
So I hope that my expectation, if I have to make a prediction, is that I'll still be helming the ship here, right, at 10up. Maybe I would like to be in a more focused, a little bit more of a narrow role as we go to a larger scale than I am today. I'd like to have fewer things on my plate and be able to hone in more specifically, on some of our objectives. I will say that I hate sort of like the 3-year for anything, like the 3-year, 5-year. I don't know anybody that has in this business, in particular in technology, that has ever been able to look back 3 years and say that they would have been doing what they thought, been where and doing what they thought they'd be doing today.
Yeah,
I just don't know that. I don't know. 3 years ago, there wasn't a 10up, right? Like if you told me I'd be having this interview and having, on top of a 42-person company, I would have thought you were nuts.
You're lucky to be able to see 12 months into the future, and particularly in this space. Awesome. Just before we wrap up, what is the number one piece of advice you would give anyone starting out, any entrepreneur trying to build their own business in this space? The number one thing that you could leave them as a takeaway?
Starting a business in just broadly in the WordPress space?
Yeah.
This is the one question I wasn't prepared to answer for this one. I feel like we've touched on so many of those points throughout. I would say work hard. Know that you'll have to start small and earn your way up. Don't be under any illusions that this is. I think this is a gravy train. I think some people come into this, especially into the product side of our business, thinking there's a gravy train here and are in for a rude awakening. Be prepared to work hard. Look for help. Don't expect instant success.
Great. Very uplifting advice, Jake.
Expect for your life to be miserable for a year.
Where can people reach out and beg you for help, Jake? No, where can people reach out and thank you for your time?
If you go to 10up.com, you'll find all of our contact information on our contact page. Most of those contact forms I'm still included on those lists. And you can hit me on Twitter, Jake M. Gold, JakeMGold, or just the @10up handle.
Cool. Finally, who would you like me to try and interview for the WP Elevation podcast, and why?
So, there's so many names that we could list, and I won't shill for other 10uppers. I think actually a great interview for you, and I'm also not shilling for my neighbors because it so happens I've got to know them because they literally live about a mile away from me. But Brian Bourne and Jennifer Bourne, which is a Bourne creative that happened to be around the corner for me. You should absolutely interview them. They are. I admire them, and they are fascinating to me as a sort of like a small business, couple that started the business family, because they are if 10up is sort of like the take something very custom and do something really, really large. They have just absolutely knocked out what it means to do a site in that small business range, right, that you're talking about, right? That small sort of maybe somewhere between 5 and 30-person company. They have just absolutely systemized, processized, just built a machine for what it means to efficiently give people a great price for a great outcome, right, for small business sites, and just move them through this machine that they've built that gives people. I admire the way that they've created a very compelling price point for a really great, right, audience, while still delivering at that price point amazing service. Like they're just the way that they've automated the entire, so much of that process, awesome, right, and built tools and systems and automation for people that want to be in that small business site and want to know, how do I make money serving the $3,000, $6,000, $10,000 right customer. There's just so much you can learn from them.
All right. Well, Brian and Jennifer Bourne from Homeborn Creative, I'm coming to get you courtesy of Jake Goldman.
Born Creative. Born Creative, is it?
Yes.
Yep.
Cool. Not Homeborn Creative.
Nope.
All right, Brian and Jennifer Bourne of Bourne Creative, I'm coming to get you for the podcast. Keep your eyes on your email inbox. I'll be in touch shortly. And Jake Goldman, thank you so much for spending an hour and 17 minutes with us on the WP Elevation podcast, man. I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to our audience, and I wish you all the best for the future at 10Up, and I'm sincerely hoping that we can get you out to Australia in the not too distant future to come and speak to us in person. I had a great time chatting with you at Pressnomics this year, and I look forward to keeping in touch in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Jake.